The Legacy of an Old Man. Chapter 1. Operation Stormfront. It was 3 a.m. when he woke from what was now considered a cat nap. He was stirred awake every hour on the hour. He was tired. Not sleepy tired, just tired. He sat down in front of his computer. He spoke to the unseen audience. "This is the last story I'm going to write. I hope you folks pay attention to it." He took a deep breath and let it out slowly and said, "And so it begins." It was May, as Sam had just finished addressing the community over a hearty breakfast. There were 5 families living at Ravenshire. They were from all walks of life, and none known to one, but guided to this spot. Sam was now in charge, a lord in his own right, but a survivor first. He was the only son his father Bill had, and he was the only namesake left for the family name. His father built this place out of nothing. It was the only thing they had left once the world they knew ended. Every block was handmade by Sam and his dad. They started with the gate tower, and from there built a wall 12 feet tall, each block weighing over a ton. Sam smiled at the memory. "This is hard work," he said to his dad. Bill looked at him. Yes it is. And when we're done, this will be a safe haven for those that Yah sends." Sam always wondered what that meant. His father had taught him the way of Yah. He explained to him that Yah speaks to each of us and sets us on a path. Our path is to build this refuge. It's not for everyone, and only those who are guided to it will be allowed to stay. Sam knew what that meant. He had seen people come and go. He got to see people for who they really were, and he got to see his father deal with the disappointment he felt when those whom he thought were there for a common goal just take advantage of him and his generosity. Sam watched the old man harden up. He would snap at his son and say, "Don't make the same damn mistakes I made, son. Judge people by their actions, not their words." Sam would nod his head and simply say, "Yes, sir." It took almost 3 years of making blocks. First the gate tower, then the deck and the extension of the home, the perimeter around the house, and then the main yard. It was back-breaking work. When done, the place resembled a medieval castle. Sam loved this place. He felt safe here, as did his sister. The two had grown up there, and in the beginning only spending 1 or 2 weeks a year, until they were 18, and then they moved there permanent. All the tools and equipment Sam watched his father get over the years all fit together and made short work of the huge task. Sadness hit Sam. It was 5 years ago today the old man passed. He was buried in the apple orchard he started from cloning ancient apple trees almost 20 years ago. His eyes watered as he stared at the old tree, now in full bloom, the sweet smell of apple blossoms filling the air. "Hey, Sam, you doing okay?" Shelby asked. Sam was solemn, head down. "Yeah, sis, I just miss him a lot." She hugged her brother. "Me too, buddy. But you know what? He is all around us. This whole place is his vision, his plan. We are living his dream, and we are doing good because of all that he did for us." "I know," Sam replied. "Dad! Dad!" A small boy ran up to Sam. "Whoa, slow down, Buck." Sam caught the 6-year-old as he ran to him. "The puppies are here! The puppies are here!" Shelby smiled and picked little Buck up and looked at him. "Well, let's go see them." The 3 went to the kennel area. There were 3 breeding pairs of working stock Dutch Shepherds and Belgian Malinois. Sam's father had meticulously bred them so that the retreat would always have man-stopping dogs to help with security. These dogs were highly sought out by all in the area, so in some cases, litters were spoken for long before the dogs even were bred. They looked in the whelping box. Little Buck started to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "We have 5 babies, Dad," Buck exclaimed. "I see that," Sam said to his son. The bitch whimpered and panted heavy. A little head popped out in its sack. "Well, looks like we have 6 now," Sam said, smiling at his son. Dylan came into the kennel and peered in. "Oh, wow, looks like 6 little biters to me," he chuckled. "Sam, can I have a minute of your time?" "Sure," Sam said. He messed up Buck's hair and said, "You listen to your Aunt Shell, or she will get after you." "Yes, sir," Buck replied. Sam and Dylan headed out towards the fast grow gardens. The two stopped. Dylan looked at Sam. "There was an intercept on the radio about 15 minutes ago. Sounds like trouble coming." "What kind of trouble?" Sam asked. "Seems like there is a die-off and no one knows what caused it," Dylan replied. "We should hold a meeting for the community this evening and bring everyone up to speed," Sam said. Dylan nodded. "I will pass the word." Ravenshire consisted of 20 acres high up in the mountains of eastern Tennessee at 2,000 feet of elevation. The ground was steep, with shelves and terraces built in for growing. There were 2 homes, the keep and the log cabin, and several tiny homes and RVs. The sawmill was there, as were the sheep, hogs, and chickens. The dogs were at the keep, and the keep was the place where they would all go should some trouble come their way. The battles that were fought by those that wanted to do harm were many, and every time the keep would protect them. Sam's focus was more concern than worry now. It's one thing to repel a band of marauders, but it's another when there's a sickness or disease. A call came over the radio. New meal was now being served. Sam went to the gate tower and relieved Jenny. She was on watch. Once she was back, Sam would go and get something to eat. His father taught him to take care of his people first, then tend to his own needs. There was a knock at the door. A brown-haired, blue-eyed, and very pregnant Serenity appeared in the doorway. "How about some lunch, hun?" she asked with a smile Sam couldn't resist. "Why, thank you, milady." She smiled and curtsied. "Chicken salad?" Sam said, as he bit into the overstuffed sandwich. "How are you doing, hun? I know this is a tough day for you." And Sam held up his finger, shaking it. "Serenity, this is the best sandwich ever," he said. He looked at her and paused. "I'm fine, I promise. You being here and our son and the little one on the way, Dad would be happy," he said. She smiled and said, "The way this one kicks, it's got to be another boy." Sam smiled. "I'll be happy either way, as long as it's a healthy baby." Serenity smiled. "We are in good hands. Martha and Kate are the best midwives, so I think we'll be just fine," she said. "Now eat that lunch, sir, before the bread dries out." "Yes, ma'am," Sam replied, and he took a big bite. Jenny returned and took over the watch. She thanked Sam for relieving her, and Sam and Serenity headed out. After lunch, there was court. This is where all the decisions and announcements were made. The heads of the homes would gather. The leader of the AgCom, the log cabin community, would talk about all the things that needed fixing or attention, and priority was placed on the most urgent work, and the leaders would get it done. Sam would have the final say and make any course corrections should there need be, or he would make the decision, and good or bad, the decision was final. This allowed for thought leadership and groupthink without the bloat or drama. The rules were simple. When decisions were made, they were executed. If there was a problem or someone wanted to create drama, they would have one chance to fix it. If they persisted to be a problem, they were invited to leave. If they refused to leave, the results were fatal. So many times in the past, people would start a problem or have hidden agendas, and it impacted the whole community. At one point, the community was divided, and both parties were banished by Sam's father. When there were a few examples made, the community respected the decisions and found it much more beneficial to work as a team rather than invite or perpetuate internal fighting. Sam and Shelby were always reserved. The reservation was always reinforced by the dealings with other people they came in contact with. In the beginning, before the floods, they would advise their father quietly. Their father would often consider it their way to protect him from himself and from those that offered false loyalty or friendship. This was foundational and would carry them through life. It was easy while he was alive. They always had him to fall back on, and painfully he would allow them to fail before he jumped in to save them. They were the family he always wanted. There was never a day where he did not thank the Most High for blessing him with these awesome kids. He was committed to teaching them and would always tell them, "I know you don't want to hear this, but there will come a time when I will not be here, and I need to know before I go that you have all the tools to take care of each other and how to use them." They hated that speech. The man they believed would live forever was warning them he would not always be there, and the thought of being without him frightened them. Court lasted an hour. The AdCom leader reported the state of the small farm. "Sam, I have good news and bad news to report today," Scott said. Scott was an older man, widowed, when his farm was raided by the Dark Ones. He owned and operated a 300-acre farm raising beef cattle, corn, soybeans, and hay. He was baling hay with an antique John Deere tractor when he saw the smoke from the farmhouse, which was set on fire. His wife mortally wounded and burned alive. 20 head of black Angus loaded on cattle trailers, all chickens and pigs, fuel and food, gone. By the time he got to the house, it was fully engulfed. No one came to help. His closest neighbor, nowhere to be seen. He sat in the garden, tears streaming from his eyes, his head in his hands. He reached skyward and screamed, "Why?" He pleaded to God to just take him now. The thought of enduring this cruel world alone terrified him. The sun started to dip. He went into a small shed, and under a tarp was an old moped. He had restored it and put side baskets on it so his wife could make egg deliveries each morning. He started to pedal the machine, and its tiny gas engine purred to life. First he went to Roger's house. He knocked on the door, which pushed open with the knocks. Inside, Roger and his wife were duct taped and gagged in chairs with their throats cut. Scott called out, "Minnie, Luke, Sarah, are you here, kids?" There was no reply. He worked his way through the home. There were no signs of the kids. Finally, he entered the garage, and to his horror, the lifeless bodies of the 3 kids hung from the rafters. He wept. He raged. This was why no one came. He would go to each of the next closest neighbors and would find a grisly mess. All the people in the mutual assistant group gone. It wasn't anything like those prepper videos, more like a pickup team at a baseball field. When everything went to hell, the 5 families closest all came to Scott since he had the biggest farm and agreed to work together. It was pretty much like that. Roger had 50 acres. He provided wood and firewood. Scott provided meat and eggs. Ricardo, vegetables and wool. Randy and Wade provided security. Randy and Wade? What happened to them? Scott said to himself. Both lived on the far ends of the 5. He went to Wade's house first. Wade was an Army Ranger in his younger days. He stayed in good shape, but was not the 20-something door kicker anymore. Randy was a Force Recon Marine before he got out. He did his last 3 years as a trainer for foreign security forces. These guys to Scott were major league badasses. Wade gasped, "Scott!" from behind a hedge. He had managed to put 2 tourniquets on in an attempt to stop the bleed from a large gunshot wound to his left thigh and one to his right arm. Empty quick clot gauze packages lay on the ground where he tried to do self-aid. Scott grabbed Wade's canteen and offered him a drink. Wade declined. "Get out of here," he gasped. "These are military-trained people, not your run-of-the-mill shitbags." "How are the others?" Wade asked, breathing erratically. "Everyone is dead that I checked." "Randy is the last house I need to check," Scott said, as panic started to set in. Wade shook his head slowly and pointed to a body at the corner of his yard. "He tried to back me up. There was too many. They overran us like a swarm of bees. They had set up in the field and watched us, got our routine down, then hit us. It was fast and hard. There was no time to react. All I could do was call for help on the CB, and they were engaging me." Scott grimaced at the thought of this. "My sons were both killed and my wife, she took a couple down with her shoddy. We got about 20 of them before it was over. How come you're still alive? Wade asked. Scott replied, I was baling hay in the back field. I stopped when I saw the smoke from my house. They set fire to. Your wife? Wade asked. Scott's eyes watered. He held his head low. I'm sorry, brother, Wade said, struggling to breathe. They took all the livestock, food, and fuel, Scott said. Wade shook his head. I'm hurt bad, my friend. He coughed and blood came from his lips. I should have put my plates in this carrier, he gasped, pointing to a small hole in the front. It missed my heart, but my lung is jacked up. What can I do? Scott asked. Wade looked at him. Pray for me. Wade looked at Scott. Go check Randy's house. There's an outhouse behind the shed. Under it's a cache. Should be a rifle, ammo, some MREs, water, and mags. Take that if it's still there, and get out. Wade struggled. Head to the mountains. Find a place to hunker down and don't come back. Scott was confused. He could rebuild. He could get more cattle from his friends. Then reality hit. If he had any friends left, that was. Scott did what Wade asked. He went to Randy's house. His wife and young son murdered in cold blood. The home was set on fire, but burned out, leaving it half burnt. He went into the backyard, and behind the shed, sure enough, was an outhouse. He opened the door, and a foul stench hit him. He closed the door quickly, gagging, then reluctantly tipped the small structure over, expecting to see a giant hole filled with human excrement and all things nasty. There was no hole, only a black tub. A black pelican case was under a piece of plywood. He removed it, and just like Wade said, inside was an AR-15 with a scope, 530 round mags full of ammo, 4 MREs, water, and 300 rounds of 5.56 in a vacuum sealed bag. A somber note was taped to the lid. It read, If you are reading this, Wade, then I have royally fucked up. I'm sorry, brother. Use the map. There was a laminated map with a route marked on it to a place 150 miles north of them. All it said was Ravenshire. There was not even a pointer to this place, just a road with an X marked on it, a red circle with RR in the middle, and an arrow pointing to take it. Just great. A map to nowhere, Scott said to himself. Scott could get almost 100 miles on a tank with a moped, and more if he pedaled it when he could. He had scrounged up another 2 gallons of non-ethanol gas and put it in antifreeze drugs. At least it wouldn't scream fuel if he came across anyone. He remembered the plan Randy and Wade had created in the event that they needed to bug out, as they called it. They would travel at night and sleep during the day, avoid contact with all people unless it was absolutely necessary. No fires unless there was a medical emergency or to boil water. They all learned how to make a Dakota fire hole, an earth-based rocket stove the native tribes used. His moped was a perfect vehicle to get to wherever this was on the map. He had been through this town on a fishing trip many years ago. Maybe there will be other people there where this was. At least I'm armed, Scott said to himself. Scott was 59 years old. He farmed all his life. His son and daughter went off to college and never came home. One was in Atlanta and one in Seattle. He and his wife always wondered what became of them after the financial collapse hit 15 years ago. The country spiraled out of control. Then freak weather and natural events came in the following years. Major earthquakes all but split California into an island, and weekly Cat 5 hurricanes washed much of the coastline on the east coast and Gulf Coast of Mexico away. And then finally, the New Madrid fault finally let loose, forever changing the landscape and flooding the lowlands. The American Redoubt, basically Idaho, is what most people know. However, it's mostly a mindset. What makes it that are the people who choose to live there and not compromise their fundamental rights as given to us by the Most High. What is not well known is there are two more redoubts which are depicted in an ancient map, one of which its origin is not well known and its authenticity is questionable to those that do not have eyes to see or ears to hear. The two eastern redoubts are in the Ozark Mountains starting near Fayette, Arkansas, and the Appalachian Redoubt that spans from its tip in northeast Tennessee to parts of Maine. They are areas where divine refuge has been allocated, and those living in those redoubts will be protected by the Most High. They are, for lack of a better word, land arks. No harm shall come to those that dwell in these areas. By harm, the Most High means all of the things needed to support life: food, water, shelter, fertile ground to farm and sustain are in these areas. These areas of divine protection are usually in the mountains high above sea level and not prone to flooding or other natural means of destruction. Scott looked intently at the map. He was on his fourth day of travel on the small machine, and to his relief, he had only burned one tank of fuel. He was stopped on an old dirt road refueling and getting ready to rest after a long night of riding. It was just about dawn when he heard what sounded like a large gunfight in the distance. He quickly got off the road and into the dense woods. The firefight lasted for hours, the occasional errant tracer being seen arcing in the air in the distance. This made him anxious and worried. He would need to go around this area to continue on. If his calculations were right, he should be close to this place on the map by tomorrow morning. Scott was 100 yards in the woods. The moped made it easy to maneuver through the trees. However, the tires were definitely not off-road tires, and care had to be taken to ensure sharp stones or pointed roots did not take a tire out. He did have a tire plug kit and one can of Fix-A-Flat with him, but space was very limited, so not much in the way of tools was carried, which meant major repairs would not be taking place. It was somewhere near noon when the sound of a diesel truck could be heard on the road. The loud machine could be heard slowing down, and the whoosh of air brakes bleeding off was heard. 5 men got out of the truck and took up a security perimeter, while one man walked into the woods straight at Scott. Scott got that tight knot in his stomach as he could feel his heart rapidly amping up and the intense sensation of adrenaline coursing through his body. He held the AR in a prone position behind 2 large rocks. The man stopped 20 feet in the woods and unzipped his trousers and squatted behind a tree to take a dump. Scott could hear what appeared to be radio traffic, but he was just out of earshot to actually make out what was being said. Scott felt weird watching the man. He was maybe 40-something. He pulled a picture from his uniform top and gazed at it. About 5 minutes later, another man from the road yelled, "LT, we gotta go, man!" This broke the man's peace, and he put the picture away and cleaned himself, then headed back to the truck. Scott noticed the truck was not a military truck, more like a commercial truck, with a white crew cab and black stake body. 3 men got in the cab and 2 got in the bed. Within a few minutes, they were back on the road. The truck pulled away and Scott noticed something on the side of the road. It was a small pack. Still high on adrenaline, he carefully and slowly made his way to the road. It was a small butt pack in old school woodland camo. He grabbed the pack, which had some weight to it, and ran back into the woods. He got back in behind the rocks, winded and breathing heavy. He paused to get control of himself. His brain flooded with what-ifs. What if they come back and search for it? What if it had a tracking device? What if it was a booby trap? What if? He paused to get his mind under control. What if I just breathe and calm down? They don't know you're here. They don't know exactly where they stopped. They don't know anything. A calm voice echoed over the noise in his pulse-drummed ears. "You are right," he said, acknowledging the calm voice. "I just need to calm down and breathe." What seemed like an hour was only 15 minutes as Scott reached for the small pack. He fumbled with the buckles and started to pull the contents out of it. In it was a 2-way radio, Motorola, like the police use. There was a compass, a pair of tactical gloves, an MRE that wasn't in the brown wrapper like his were. These were held in place by what appeared to be a thick, heavy-duty rubber band. a smaller pouch with a red cross on it, 5 mags for an AR and a green bandolier, a map and some other papers. He looked at the map. It appeared to show forward movement from North Carolina's coast inward, with more arrows showing the same from Virginia and Georgia. The Georgian arrow split one down the center of Florida and the other along the southern coastal states, or what was left of them, based on this map. Pretty much half of those states were now underwater. The same with the eastern seaboard. This was not the map that Scott remembered the U.S. to look like. He gazed at this map. Is this what the world looked like now? Scott asked himself. Who were these men? And what was that firefight about this morning? The West Coast was even more concerning. California much smaller than he remembered. The coastal states seemingly now much smaller. Arrows from Mexico into the border states, shaded with lined markers, to perhaps show an invasion and land conquered. He took a deep breath and sighed. The world has changed, and without media or internet, no one really knows about it. He grabbed the papers stapled together. These were ordered in 3 languages, English, Russian, Mandarin. He read the English portion. Operation Stormfront. Use and support rogue U.S. militia groups to establish loyal, controlled population areas. Suppress any resistance to them by military force and move on to the next town or population center. Cities larger than 10,000 people will be enclosed, and strict ingress and egress points will be established to control the population. Your teams will arm and supply the loyal participants. They will be handled by regional leadership. Those loyal and supporting our efforts will be identified with a barcode tattoo on the right forearm. Their rabble will have a sun and sickle patch so they can be identified. Anyone not identified will be considered insurgents and will be rooted out. Major objectives. U.S. capital and state capitals will be seized, and our people will be put in place to govern. Anything north of Virginia and across the entire country will be considered a line of contention. We only want the southern part of America, which is rich in food and other natural resources. Those that want to live will work for the state and contribute to the restoration effort. Those that are sick or too old or refuse will be summarily executed and disposed of. Scott went on to read how they would maneuver and take America town by town. Areas that were not under control were circled in red. There were not many areas like this. He did note the area he was in a larger red circle that encompassed where he would be going. This gave him some relief, but also worry. It was 3 p.m. when Scott heard the roar of a diesel truck start to wind down, and that clackety noise a diesel makes as it idles slowly roll by. It was the same truck for sure. Scott was a mess, shaking, and trying to control his breathing. The truck slowly rolled past where Scott was hiding. About 100 yards down the road, he could hear the squeaking of air brakes and the bleed off of air as the truck stopped. There was silence. After about 10 minutes, the diesel fired up and went through the gears, sounding like a school bus off in the distance. Scott breathed a big sigh of relief. He had 4 more hours of hiding before he could get out on the road. He would use this time to figure out how to get around the small town ahead and get back on course. The evening dust started to settle in. Scott went out to the road and sat for a minute. This was a tactic that Wade and Randy had taught him. They told him never just assume no one is watching. Always anticipate an ambush. Stop, look, listen, and smell. It's a little known fact outside of the military that the Viet Cong could smell U.S. troops before they could see them. This allowed them the advantage to maneuver away or set up hasty ambushes. It is taught that roads and heavily beaten paths are for people that want to be ambushed. Unfortunately for Scott, his mode of transportation was dependent on these 2 things. His advantage was the fact that he could pedal the moped if he needed to cut the small engine off, but nonetheless, he needed a decent road to get to where he was going. Scott pedaled the moped until he got it up to speed to start it. The engine sputtered to life. He found a dirt road that would bypass the town. It was almost a full moon, so Scott could run without the dim headlight on tonight. It was just about 0230 when he came up to a bridge. A large moonlit sign said, "Welcome to Harris Ford." He stopped by the sign. Bridges were choke points. The Clinch River was a wide and swift-running river. There was no going around it. Again he sat there, calmed his breathing, and did his stop, look, listen, and smell. There was the smell of the river, the rolling sound of the moving water. He caught a waft of wood smoke and the smell of rot. He could almost see to the end of the bridge, but not all the way. He was just about to move when he heard a large splash, almost like someone dropped a large rock from the bridge into the water. Chapter 2. Wish You Were Here. Scott watched intensely, barely making out the figure moving about at the far end of the bridge. He was in mid-thought when there was another large splash. Scott repositioned himself to be able to see the side of the river where the splashes came from. Within the span of 5 minutes, another splash. This time he saw the splash, and to his dismay realized it was a small body wrapped in what appeared to be a white tarp. He silently gasped, 3 splashes, 3 bodies. 15 minutes had passed. He pedaled the moped across the bridge so he could listen while he rode. Halfway there, Scott said to himself. He paused on the bridge. With the rushing water, it was hard to hear. He could not see any movement. However, with the clouds coming in, the moonlight was almost non-existent. Scott started to pedal. As he got within 50 feet of the end of the bridge, he stopped. A woman was on the bridge siding, her hands raised to the heavens. "Why?" she yelled. Scott just stared at her. "Why, Lord?" she asked. She fastened 2 cinder blocks to her ankles. "She's going to kill herself," Scott said to himself. Scott jumped off the moped and approached her. "Ma'am, what do you think you're going to do?" he asked her. She looked at him. She started to sob. Scott moved closer. He got within 10 feet and said, "My name is Scott, and I would like to talk to you. Would that be okay?" he asked the woman. She nodded solemnly. Scott said, "I'm really glad. Can I help you off that siding and get you to some safer ground?" Scott reached up, and the woman, nervous and trembling, grabbed his hands. As she tried to move, she knocked one of the cinder blocks over the side, which pulled her leg out from under her. Knocking the second block over, she screamed. Scott, with all his might, held on to her. Her eyes were wide and wild. Panting, she said to Scott, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Scott looked at her. "You're not going to die tonight, but I need you to work with me." Her legs were over the siding, and Scott could see the rope. He told her, "You need to hold on to the railing so I can cut the ropes." She was panicked and didn't want to let go of Scott. Scott changed his tone from calm to stern. "Ma'am, I need you to hold on to the railing." She snapped out of it and grabbed the railing. Scott used his multi-tool to cut the rope. 2 more splashes were heard, but no body was going to be the cause. Scott grabbed the woman and pulled her up and over the siding. He was winded. She was winded. They both walked to the end of the bridge, where there were some concrete picnic tables, where hikers and kayakers would take breaks to eat and rest. They sat there. Scott was tired. The woman asked him what he was doing there. Scott replied, "I guess I was there to save you." She cried. She reached out and grabbed his hands. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you saved my life tonight." Scott nodded and acknowledged her. "Well, maybe you can tell me who you are," Scott asked. She smiled and looked at him. "Scott, my name is Martha. I'm She paused. "I was an ICU nurse until the crap went sideways." "What happened tonight?" Scott asked. She worked through her emotions, tears streaming down her face. Martha said, "I said goodbye to my husband and 2 small kids." Scott looked at her and asked, "What happened to them?" Again, working through her emotions, "They were killed by raiders. I was in the woods picking blackberries. When I came home, my husband was duct taped to a chair, and my two little ones were hanging from the rafters in front of him. His throat was cut. Scott grimaced at the thought, and without even realizing, said, "I have seen that too with my friends. They were all murdered, some hung, some wounded, and burned alive, like my wife was." She gripped his hand hard. "You poor man. Why are you here? Do you have family here?" Scott shook his head slowly and replied, "No." "When the world took a dump," Scott paused, "me and 5 families banded together. We had a pretty good setup. Between all of us, we had food, wood to heat and build with, a fairly deep fuel supply, and 2 ex-military guys to provide security. Up until last week." Scott paused again. "Damn, it's been a week already," he said to himself. Scott snapped back into it. "Sorry, lost my thought for a second. Until a week ago, we were just a bunch of people working hard together to work through the crazy the world had become. Anyway," Scott recanted the horrors of the previous week and went silent. He had been through a lot, and had really not stopped and thought about it. She gripped his hands tighter. "This place you're going, Ravenshire, what is it?" "Well, I don't rightly know. The military guys never talked about it. As one was dying, he told me where there was a hidden cache, and to take what was there and head to the mountains. He said I would be safe there. That's all I had to go on." "Well," Martha said, "how about we go together? I have a 4-wheeler and a garden cart. We can get some supplies from my own little hidden cache and head there in the morning." Scott held his hand up. "No, we travel at night only. That's what the military guys stressed. They said you travel at night, and wherever you are going, you watch it for a day or two to make sure it's safe. If we just roll up there, maybe the same people that killed our friends and loved ones are there." She nodded. "That makes a lot of sense." "We should go now," Martha said. Scott nodded and said yes, we should. The road to Martha's cache site was not well trodden. It looked more like a deer trail than anything. There was a small olive drab tent there. "Well, this is camp for the night," Martha said. "You can set up your tent wherever you like." Dawn was setting in. Scott found a spot to set up his sleeping bag and got nestled in. "What? You don't have a tent?" Martha asked. Scott looked at her. "Most of what we had was lost in the fire or taken by the marauders." "I will be fine," Scott said. She nodded and replied, "Should be fine for the night." She sat on a large stump and watched as Scott drifted off to sleep. Martha sat and wondered. She was a prepper. Her husband always sat on the fence about prepping, but let her do what made her happy. The worst thing that could go wrong with this prepping is we have what we need if we can't go to the store. This paid off for the young family back in 2020 when a bioweapon was released on the world. Matt was thankful for his prepper wife, and with her medical skills, she was able to keep the family safe from COVID-19. She set up a decon station in the garage and would go through the process each time her tired body came home. While he was furloughed from his job as a chef, he kept the home fires burning and used his culinary skills to make world-class meals from fresh homegrown meat and vegetables. Their home wasn't the biggest or fanciest, but it had all they needed, and 24 acres of rich farmland. Chickens, pigs, sheep, and a couple of calves and a milk cow, not to mention a garden, with all one needed from the produce market. Who needs a store when you have all this, Matt would wonder. "I know most of the prepper and survivalists in this area," Martha thought, long and hard. She remembered. "Aha!" Martha exclaimed, catching herself before she woke Scott up. "Ravenshire!" She smiled. If this is the place Scott was going to, this was the place she needed to be. The man who built that place was low profile, but through her contacts she knew, or at least knew the rumors, of what this guy and his family built. Martha was excited about the new adventure. She felt a tear stream down her face and looked to the heavens. "Thank you, Father Yahweh, for sending Scott to save me. Please, Father, look after Matt, Thomas, and Alicia. I miss them so much." It was around noon when the smell of bacon and eggs woke Scott. "Good morning, sunshine," Martha greeted. Scott wiped the sleep from his eyes. What the? A plate piled high with 3 eggs and like a half a pound of smoked bacon and a cup of coffee was handed to him. Oh my God, Scott exclaimed. This is amazing, Martha. But I thought the raiders took all your food and supplies. Well, they did, but they didn't catch all my chickens. It must have been city folks as they never looked in the smokehouse. The coffee is from the stash, so enjoy, she said with a big smile. Scott wolfed down the wholesome meal. I've been eating MREs for a week, he said, between bites. While they taste okay and fill you up, they are not fresh eggs and bacon. Martha put 2 more eggs and another tong full of bacon on his plate. Scott did not complain. Martha swirled the coffee in her cup around. She spoke. So, Scott, this place you're going. Scott, scraping the yolk and bits of egg and bacon with his fork, replied, Yeah? Well, I think I know about it. Scott looked up at her and replied, Oh, yeah? Martha took a sip from her mug. Yeah. You ever hear of people they call preppers? Scott replied, I have. To be honest, I didn't really know much about them until Wade and Randy briefed the families. They were tied into some type of prepper network online. Okay. Good, Martha replied. Well, I'm what they call a prepper, so I was tied into many different online groups and networks as well. More than likely I swam in the same circles as Wade and Randy. Well, anyways, about 5 years ago, this guy is on a forum. He says he's building a land ark in the Tennessee mountains and was looking for people to join his group. Most of the people blew it off, as what he was talking about was over the top expensive and way out of the reach for most people. Well, I guess some people took him up on it, and it turns out the guy was super generous, which led to them taking advantage of him and his family. Rumor had it there was a falling out, and the group disbanded. So this guy posts on the forum that he's no longer interested in forming a group. People are not ready for that level of commitment, and that was the last time he ever posted on the site. He said something interesting in his last post, which got a lot of people talking, thinking, and responding. He said that Yah would lead the right people to him, that he himself no longer was looking. Scott was on the edge of his seat. Wow, that's pretty deep, Martha, Scott said. So what does this have to do with where we're going? Martha smiled. His online handle was William of Ravenshire. Scott's eyes got wide. Holy smokes, you think this is the same place? Martha smiled and said, I do. Think about this. You were the sole survivor. You got the map. I was about to kill myself. You showed up. Is any of this making sense to you? Scott raised his hands to the heavens. Father, thank you for leading us to each other and to this new hope. Father, please grant us safe passage to Ravenshire. Martha followed with a Amen. We should get packed and be ready to move at dusk, she said. Scott replied, Yes, you are right. The two worked to get as many supplies into the large garden cart, now attached to Martha's four-wheeler. Her small cache was impressive and not small at all. The garden cart was good size, and it was filled to the brim with all her supplies. It was just about 5 p.m. when Martha asked Scott if he was hungry. Scott nodded his head yes. She smiled. Well, how about round 2 of eggs and bacon? Scott smiled and said, That would be awesome. The two worked together to prepare the meal. Scott started to gather up some firewood for the fire. Martha asked Scott what he was doing. Scott said getting some wood to cook over. Martha laughed. And attract the attention of anyone around or in the woods? Scott stopped. I never thought of that. Good point, Martha. Martha pulled the extra large charcoal chimney out of the large yard cart. Scott went over to her. I thought you said no fires. Martha smiled. We're not going to make a large this is where we are, come raid us fire. We're making a hobo stove. There will be some smoke, but once it gets down to the coals, it will serve our needs. Scott stepped back. Okay, so what do you need me to do? Martha pointed to the cart. There's a small bag of lumped charcoal in there. Grab that and bring it over. Scott retrieved the charcoal. Next, Martha took 2 double skewers and put them in pre-drilled holes to make a crisscross pattern. Scott chuckled. How the heck did you figure that out? Martha replied, Well, I first learned it on YouTube, just to use the chimney to cook over. Then this other guy modified that to put the skewers in, so you actually had a burner, and smaller pots wouldn't fall in. Martha pondered for a moment. I wonder whatever happened to Prepper X. She refocused and got back to work. She pulled out the small squeeze bottle and sprayed some of the contents over the charcoal. Then with a flick of the bic, the charcoal was lit. She set it on a level area, and the orange-blue flames licked the top of the chimney. She asked Scott to hand her the 10-inch cast-iron skillet and the eggs and bacon. Scott nodded and handed her the skillet and gathered the other ingredients for their feast. Soon it was sizzling and popping. That's such a great idea to use the chimney, Martha. Scott gave her a thumbs up. Scott asked Martha if she was armed. Martha looked at him with an unsure expression. Scott stumbled for a response. I didn't mean to offend. You seem like you got your stuff together, so I was just wondering. Since all I have is this AR, I was hoping you had a weapon as well. You know, just in case. Martha smiled. Scott, I have a pistol, and yes, I know how to use it. Very well, I might add. Scott breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, good, Scott said. I have no idea what we are going into, so... Martha interrupted. So you wanted to make sure I had your back? It's all good. Now the question is, do you know how to work that AR? Scott bowed his head. I'm not a badass with it, but we all had to hit targets at 100 yards to qualify with Wade and Randy for our patrols. So yes, I can hit a target. Martha looked at the older man. Have you ever shot anyone, Scott? For some reason, this saddened Scott. No, I have not, and I hope I never have to. Martha smiled. Well, I haven't either, and like you, I hope I never have to. But I won't hesitate if someone threatens me with a weapon. Scott nodded and simply said, Same. The two finished cleaning up and stowing the cooking gear. A tailgate net from a pickup truck was cast over the overflowing trailer, and the sound of camo ratchet straps was heard clicking away. Martha asked Scott to bounce the trailer up and down. He did. There was some clanky noises. More clicks were heard. Do it again, Martha asked. And Scott bounced the trailer some more. No noise. Now the front, Martha pointed to the front of the trailer, and Scott jumped up and down on the tongue of the trailer. No noise. Well, I think we're ready, Martha said. Looking at Scott. Since we don't have radios, Martha stated, let's use some simple hand signals. She held up a fist. This means stop. She held up 5 fingers. This means how many people. 1 finger for each person. If we see headlights, ditch off to the side. I know a way around the small town, Martha said. We will need to take that, as we don't want to draw attention from people in town. Scott agreed. Scott, why don't you take the lead? Your ride is a lot more quiet than mine, and I will hang in the back, Martha said. Once it's totally dark, hand signals are going to be useless, so we're going to have to think on our feet. Scott agreed. Scott said, I think we got about an hour of dusk left here, if that. Martha replied, yes. Our trip to that X is about 20 minutes, with no problems popping up. Scott gave a thumbs up and said, let's go. The two started down the trail, and then as they came out of the woods, stopped, looked, and listened. There was no activity. They idled down the long gravel driveway and out onto the paved road. Scott was in the lead, and the little moped was topped out at its neck, braking 19 miles an hour. The evening air was cool, with pockets of warm air. Most of the homes were blacked out. An occasional oil lamp could be seen. Some homes were burned. They passed one home where it was still smoldering. This made the hair on Scott's neck stand up. Martha felt a tear go down her face as she passed the home, knowing only too well what had happened. They were on the road for about 15 minutes now, and the sign that said Welcome to Farmersville was now just a few yards in front of them. Martha pulled up alongside Scott. Okay, now you follow me, said Martha. I will go slow. This is a windy dirt road, so just take it easy, she said. Scott replied, got it. Martha took the lead, and now it was starting to really get dark. Scott saw the red taillights come on. He pulled up alongside Martha. What is it? Scott asked. Martha replied, A tree down. She looked at Scott. Get your AR ready. This could be a trap. Scott pulled the rifle out. He could barely see. Martha looked at him. Where's the light? Scott replied, I don't have one. Shit, Martha said. Okay, we need to move quick. She pulled a small flashlight out and held it out to her side. This way anyone shooting at it would miss her body and only hit her arm or hand, unless they had thermal or night vision. Martha moved to the base side of the tree, and she could clearly see the tree was struck by lightning, and not too long ago. Martha breathed a sigh of relief. She hated nighttime and hissed under her breath, I can't see shit. I feel like I'm being watched. This is just fucking great. I hope this is all worth it. Then she realized she could have been at the bottom of the Clinch River. She shook the thought from her head. Martha free-spooled the winch on the front of her ATV and asked Scott to secure the cable around the tree. Scott came back and the 2,500-pound winch complained at the heavy load. But the tree started to move, and once it was where they could get by it, Scott unhooked the cable and Martha spooled it in. Once past the down maple, they proceeded carefully down the gravel road. Martha stopped, and they were now on a junction of a main highway. She turned the ATV off, and Scott turned the moped off. They sat there for what seemed like a long time, but in reality, it was just maybe 5 minutes. Ready? Scott asked. Martha replied, Let's go. They started the machines and quickly started up the switchback. Scott saw the power substation, or what was left of it, and made a right onto another dirt road. It was a dark, black night with little moonlight. As they got off the road, maybe 100 yards, Scott stopped and Martha pulled up alongside Scott. What's wrong? She asked. Scott replied, I think we need to find a place to camp for the night. If we go up there, or even down this road, folks might shoot first and ask questions later. Martha thought about this for a minute. I think you're right, Scott. If we're going where I think we are going, being seen is probably better than not. At least we can show them we are no threat. Scott agreed. Let's go in more, Martha suggested. This is pretty steep and unforgiving land. One misstep, and you might be falling down a 100-foot ravine. We're up in the mountains now, so we need to be extra careful, Martha warned. Let's use the headlight on the moped to find a spot. It's pretty dim. It should work nicely. Scott agreed and fired up the old machine. They drove slowly, looking for an old logging road or some place to stash the machines and hide. Tomorrow was the big day. They came up to where the road split. It went straight or to the right. Straight ahead was an old metal barn, which had seen better days. It didn't appear that it had been used in a long time. Tonight it would be home for both of them. Crypt Keeper, Hornet's Nest. Go for Crypt Keeper. Roger, stand by for sit rep. Crypt Keeper, Hornet's Nest. 2 all-terrain type vehicles just pulled into the stables. 2 subjects, both armed. Looks like one has a trailer loaded with supplies. How copy? Roger, good copy, Crypt Keeper. Keep eyes on tangos and report any movement. Good copy, Hornet's Nest. Crypt Keeper out. Hornet's Nest out. Crypt Keeper was an LPOP listening post, observation post that was built in the back corner of an old private cemetery. This gave a good vantage point to the road and the barn. The road to the barn was a dead end, so they would either come down past the LPOP or turn around and go back out to the paved road. This was 1.5 miles away from Ravenshire. The LPOP was equipped with a thermal imager, and Scott and Martha were now being watched. Bill woke Sam. Buddy, we got company. Sam sprang up. Wait, what? Sam asked. We got to get into position. 2 armed people at the barn, Bill said. Sam reached over and grabbed his boots and put them on. Then he donned his plate carrier and helmet. He would wait to check his night vision. Sam had just gotten out of the Coast Guard before everything went to hell. He was a port security officer and was on the lead-at team, like his father before him. Bill and Sam would set up an ambush at the overlook spot, and with any luck, no one would get hurt. You ready, old man? Sam teased his father. Knock it off of that old man crap, you little shit, Bill grumbled at his son. Sam smiled and laughed. The 2 headed out. They had a pre-made ambush point and a log barricade. This was the only spot on the road where a person could observe the retreat, and it was a spot where they would engage any bad actors that were coming their way. Sam radioed his sister. "Rattler 2, Crypt Keeper." "Go ahead, Rattler 2. Rattler 1 and myself are heading to Bushwhack Bravo." "Copy that. No movement so far," Shelby replied. Shelby hated this spot. She talked her father into letting her take the oldest dog they had, a German Shepherd named Odin, and make her feel safe. The 13-year-old was slowing way down, and in more ways than none appreciated still being needed. Throughout the night there would be several check-ins and no activity. It was just about 08:30 when Scott woke up. He gasped as he had fallen to sleep through all the anxiety. Martha came around as a beam of sunlight hit her face. "Good morning," Scott greeted. Martha yawned and said a yawning good morning. "How about a nice cold cup of coffee?" Scott offered. Martha smiled and said, "Better than no coffee," as the two choked the cold brew down and got their bearings. Martha spoke. "You see what is going on here," as she looked out the barn. "This is the last place you would want to have a fight." "A fight?" Scott asked. "Yeah," Martha pointed. "See a cliff on one side and a super steep mountain on the other? If you're on that road, you have no other place to go. It's brilliant," she said. Scott was not a tactical guy and just went with her assessment. The two got on the machines and started to move out. They pulled up to the junction and then took the right and started down the dirt road. "Crypt Keeper Rattlers, Tango's Oscar Mike. Speed slow, 1 ATV, wood trailer, and a small scooter. How copy?" "Rattler 1, good copy. Stay put and keep watch for any support for them." Scott got to the small rise and held his fist up, signaling to stop.